Hey everyone, welcome back to our final episode of Pillars of Creation. We've been going through Genesis chapters 1 through 11, and today we're finally going to finish with chapter 11, and maybe a little bit more.
And there's a huge sigh of, hope it's satisfaction.
Yeah, hopefully we can end with some satisfaction here. Today's title of our lesson is going to be Organized Rebellion. Okay?
Got it.
So let's figure out what that means. Here, Mike, let's do it.
Okay. This is the story of the Tower of Babel. And I think it's appropriate because we're going to go a number of different directions tonight to not only go over this story, but to really look to tie chapters 1 through 11 of Genesis together and to tie it then to what follows in Genesis chapter 12.
Okay.
And we do want to remember, as we read this story and as we talk here tonight, you want to remember this is the end of a section and this is the last story. And this is not just about, we've run out of events to talk about and then we're going to move on to the next chapter. It's the last story in this section, so it has a special purpose and it has a special place. It's trying to give us a special message. It's wrapping these 11 chapters up.
Yeah.
So let's begin. And we're going to begin looking at chapter 10, the last verse there, verse 32. And Jordan, would you read that, starting there, go down through verse 9?
Yes. So just remind you, the last chapter 10 was the Table of Nations.
Yes.
So it says in verse 32, these are the clans of Noah's sons, according to their lines of descent, within their nations. From these, the nations spread out over the earth after the flood. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth."
All right. So, first of all, let's eliminate one thought or clarify one thought. Chapter 10 to chapter 11 is not chronological. It's not like chapter 10 were events and then chapter 11 were the next events. As you see, it really appears almost very clearly that chapter 11 is an explanation, further explanation of chapter 10.
Yeah.
Because you have the Table of Nations, and then you go back to a time when everybody was together. And again, you're asking yourself, why this now? Why this here at the end of this section? And we're going to talk about it. So I think right away we can look for a chiasm.
I think we can too.
And I think in looking for the chiasm, we start to see what's a clear, and this was a pretty clear one.
Yeah.
What's the first thing about the story here that you notice that sticks out?
The whole world was speaking one language.
Okay, that doesn't sound normal, right?
No.
But here they are. And the end is what?
The end is when you get down there to 9, they're speaking different languages.
Okay, so this is the bookends of this little story here. Yeah. You've got one language, many different languages. Mm-hmm. Now they're speaking one language, and what's their concern in this story? Does it say?
They're afraid that they're actually going to be scattered all over the place.
They don't want to be scattered, so they want to do something that keeps them together.
Yeah.
And at the end of the story, what happens?
They end up getting scattered.
They're scattered.
Yeah.
So they're one language, they get scattered, or they're one language, they don't want to be scattered, they get scattered, and they talk all a bunch of different languages.
Yeah.
What comes in between?
God acts in there.
God acts and God speaks. So you got language, God's language, and then a mixing up of the languages.
Okay.
So there's a purpose to that. Now, not only in that, we see a purpose in trying, and who are we talking to? Who's this speaking to? Who's the first audience?
Yeah, we're talking about the ancient Israelites.
This is ancient Israel, and they're talking about, they're being shown things that they would then communicate to one another and to their neighbors. Mm-hmm. And what are they trying to communicate? What's the big story they're trying to communicate to themselves and to their neighbors?
Yeah, This is our God. He is the one God.
This is Yahweh.
Yeah.
This is Yahweh. And this is our God compared to your God. Now, who was the new kid on the block? Was it the other civilizations or was it them?
It would have been the Israelites.
It would have been them. So who had the ancient stories? It was the other civilizations. And they had these stories about creation. And they had the stories about rebellion. And they had stories about what else?
About how things happen, like the flood.
The flood.
How natural disasters happen. Yeah.
Okay. They also had stories about
Why they're scattered.
Where's diversity from?
Yeah.
So now Israel's going to come along and say, we've heard all this, we understand this. And it's first to educate them as a people for their identity as they will become the nation of Israel. But as this new people that's coming out of captivity by Egypt, they are being educated as to their identity. But then they're going to turn around and say, this is really who we are because this is who our God is.
Yeah.
And all those things you heard, in one sense, it's like our God's better than your God. But they're going to say, our God's totally unlike any of your gods.
Yeah.
It's interesting what they don't say is what?
They don't say, like, we're better than you, I guess. I don't know. I guess they kind of, in a sense, do, but...
What do they say? Does God exist?
That's a good point. Now, they all believe God exists.
Yeah. And they don't say, our God exists, your God doesn't.
Yeah.
Your God's fake God, fake news. No, they don't say that. They just said, here's our God.
Yeah.
And our God is supreme. Matter of fact, our God is the God over your gods. It's their story. And again, this is a story that they tell. And it's the confusion of languages. Now, I don't know that we have to get into, I don't know exactly what's going on and exactly how they're speaking one language and exactly how they develop other different languages. All I know is this is a bad thing. In fact, when you look through Hebrew tradition and Hebrew writings and Hebrew scholarship, I think we've mentioned this once before, that there were three main rebellions in the Hebrew mind.
Yeah.
There was
the fall of man.
Fall of man in Eden.
You had the spiritual fall.
You had the fall in Eden.
Yeah.
Then you have Genesis 6, that bizarre story of the sons of God with the daughters of men. They saw that as another rebellion, and then you have the building of this tower. So this is not just this is a good thing that went bad. No, this was major rebellion against God's plan. How so? Well, let's go down through here real quick and let's see why this would have been seen this way. And before we go, I keep wanting us to get to the story, but then I stop us. I know, I'm sorry, but this is the Tower of Babel. And where is it located, does it say in verse 1?
It says Shinar, but that
Shinar.
would have been Sumer. Ancient Sumer.
Ancient Sumer.
Yeah.
And it would have been the area of Babylonia.
Yeah.
And in fact, the word Babel, we're going to look at its meaning in a second. This is the only place in the Hebrew Bible where this Hebrew word is translated Babel. And I know we've talked about this. Every other place, this word is translated
confused, right?
Babylon.
Oh, I thought you were like talking about the actual Hebrew word.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah. I thought we were going to make great impact there with
we've
that.
been pretty on point together throughout the series. There's bound to be a time we messed up.
No, but that's significant. This is about, first of all, the history of the origin of Babylon. Now, why would that be?
Yeah.
What would be significance of that? Think about Babylon and the history of Israel. Not when they come out of Egypt, but down the road. In fact, Babylon becomes the symbol of rebellion. You have the origin of Babel or Babylon here. In the last book of the Bible is what?
You have the picture of Rome being Babylon.
You have Babylon, and if you depending on how you interpret the book of Revelation, but I think it's very clear it's referring to Rome, and it's the power of rebellion, and it's called Babylon.
Yeah.
So Babylon to God's people became the symbol rebellion against God's plan.
Yeah.
Here's its origin right here. So I said we'll start here. Let's go to it, and let's look at verse 1 there. We said it wasn't in chronological order. We know that the nations here, by the way, the nations all being together, they would have reflected in chapter 10 the 70 nations that are mentioned there. This would not have been the entire world as we know it today. Why?
That's all. This is what they knew.
This is all they knew. The Hebrews didn't know, like the ancient area of the Middle East didn't know. There were parts of the world that even as long as the date when the Persians were in control in that area of the world, they weren't aware of the Chinese. Just a little bit, a few thousand miles that way. You had this huge, great civilization going on. They didn't know about them. They probably didn't know about the Irish or whatever would have been there, where the Irish was.
They definitely didn't know about the Americas.
Whatever's going on in the Americas, there's Native Americans, original people here at that time. Nobody knew about them.
One thing I wanted to point out too is that in verse 2 it says, as people moved eastward. So I know we mentioned it before, this idea of moving east and
What
west.
does that imply?
And that east was moving away, like against what God wanted them to do.
Exactly.
West was towards God, east was away from God.
And that kind of brings up the point that we've made before. You have a parallel between the flood before the flood, and after the flood. And this is a story, and one of the significant parts of this story is where this falls after the flood. Before the flood, you had, in chapter 1, creation. And then and before the flood, after creation, you have
man and then the fall of man.
Okay, you've got the Garden of Eden, and then you have the fall of man. And then the next story, not only do you have the fall of man, but you have the fall of
you have brothers, you have the descendants of Adam.
Fall of relationships. And then that relationship of Cain, the fall of Cain, it goes and creates a line of people that becomes a line of rebellion.
Yeah.
It gets so bad, the world's messed up. What does God do? The flood comes, recreation. So you've got recreation. And so you've got a new creation again. They walk out of the ark. And then the next story, what happens? You've got a garden.
Yeah. You have garden.
And then
Noah gets drunk. And then you have Ham and Noah.
You have a fall of a man. Then you have a fall of a people. And you have a rebellion. So this would be Cain and Abel in Cain's life after the flood.
Yeah.
Only it's not an individual and it's not a family.
It's a group of people.
It's civilization. So you have in chapter 11 then, it's not bad at first. It says, as men moved eastward. Now that's not good because everybody was moving away from God, was moving east. So they're moving east. That tells us they're going away from God's plan. They said to each other, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. Now, it's hard for us to think about this, but that's a new invention.
Yeah. They use brick instead of stone and tar for mortar.
Right.
Yeah. So
An
they're doing
improvement.
something different. Yeah.
So what would that represent?
Technology. The advancement of civilization using technology.
Yeah, and I'm not sure with the real root meanings of technology. We understand technology to us and the advancement of technology is the advancement of abilities to do things.
Yeah. You know, this is kind of reminding me too of the line of Cain, where you also had technological advancement in his line with weaponry.
Weaponry?
Yeah, so...
What, in art?
Yeah, in art
music?
and stuff. So civilization is advancing, but not being used for good purposes.
Right.
So here we're also looking at an advancement of technology, and what are people going to do with it?
Yeah. And think about it. This is a story of mankind. And this we can apply, there's some principles here we can certainly apply today. You've got advancement. This is not wrong. It's not bad. God doesn't say anything about bricks being bad and tar being bad. Okay, you can build better buildings, more sturdy, more flexible building.
Yeah.
But that's not bad. And we could say that about any advancement.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got, you could go to, imagine when a person first saw a chariot, and that would have come out of the army. Isn't that interesting? That's probably of all civilizations, military development brings out...
Advances technology,
even in our day.
Yeah.
You know, it's the military that brings advancement of technology. So you got the chariot, or you got a development of the space shuttle. You've got the Sumerians developed the alphabet.
Yeah.
And I just learned recently that they predated the Phoenicians.
Yeah.
But the Phoenicians grabbed some of that and developed. So our Western alphabet comes from Phoenicians. So you got the alphabet, writing. Imagine how that transformed and advanced society. And now you got the internet.
Yeah. Money instead of just trading animals or things.
Immense.
Yeah.
And all of these things are good. All of advancement can be good.
Mm-hmm.
You got the idea that the Earth is the center of the universe, geocentric astronomy, and then guys look around and say, "No, I think the Earth's going around the sun."
Yeah.
So you've got that advancement. Now you got quantum physics.
Yeah. Things you can only imagine. You can't even see them.
Yeah. And we can't look at advancement and we can't look at things that are true and say that's bad. No, they're good. We embrace knowledge.
Yeah.
But yet, what's the problem here?
You can use them for bad.
You use it for
evil purposes. Yeah.
Yep. So let's read on. After that, they had this advancement, and then what did they do?
They have an idea.
What's their idea?
Let's build a city with a tower. So they're ready to build a city and a tower that reaches to the heavens.
Okay.
So that they can make a name for themselves.
Okay. What does that remind you of? Did someone else build a city?
Yeah, Cain built a city.
Cain built a city.
Yeah.
They're going to build a city. And they're going to do it for what reason?
They want to make a name for themselves and prevent themselves from being scattered.
All right. Now there's a problem.
Yeah.
Now there's a problem. It's their motivation. It's their purpose. It's their goal.
Yeah.
Not the advancement.
Because you would read that second part of being scattered, you're like, oh, that's not, why? I mean, they want to be together, they want to be unified. That doesn't seem so bad.
Now,
why?
But why God? What did God said?
He wanted them to scatter all over. He wanted them to populate the earth.
Right. And also, you get the sense here, this is bad because God knows what people will do when they're little groups by themselves. Mm-hmm. What are they going to do if civilization stays combined as one human civilization in one place?
Yeah.
It'd be bad.
I mean, technology would probably advance pretty quickly if you all spoke the same language.
But not just the advancement of
together.
Technology, but the advancement of evil.
Yeah.
So just one thought there. So what happens? God comes down to see the city. There's that picture of God coming down. Yahweh, this is the Lord. Yahweh comes down.
Yeah.
When's the last time Yahweh has been on earth to see what's going on?
I think it was, the last time I remember is in the garden.
He's walking in the garden.
Yeah.
And he comes in and says, what's going on here, Adam? Mm-hmm. So he comes down to see what's going on. Now you talked about, does God not know what's going on? What's the purpose of this expression, he comes down?
He comes down as this relational kind of thing. It's like...
what were they going to do?
What were they going to do?
Yeah, what's their plan?
Well, their plan is to get up to God.
Yep.
They're trying to get to him, and instead he's like, I'm going to come down there, which kind of implies their tower probably wasn't very tall to begin with.
Yeah, and these towers exist in Babylonian civilization. They're the Ziggurats.
Yeah.
The Ziggurats. And
we can get a picture of that up on the screen.
Yeah. Okay. And there were towers like this all over in all civilizations. You had pyramids. You go to South America, you got the Mayan temples. You know? You got the mounds and the hills in Illinois, Cahokia, Illinois.
Yeah.
My sister lived there one time. That's why I know that's what.
Yeah, and on the top of these towers were supposed to be altars to gods, for them to like kind of come down and enjoy their sacrifices and rest and all these kinds of things.
Yeah. Gives a little reading too when you get to the Old Testament later on, where God would have them tear down the altars that were in the high places. Mm-hmm. That was their attempt to get up to the gods.
Yeah.
And to be there. But anyways, God comes down to them and he says, this ain't gonna work. They are going against my plan. They're going to try to make a name for themselves. And we get to that idea of we're going to make a name for ourselves. The idea of name.
Yeah.
Remember what Cain did? The idea he's building on his name, and he leaves and goes east.
Yeah.
And what is he going to do? He's going to build a city to make a name for himself. And people want to make a name for themselves.
Yes, people do.
And
Yes, we do.
what does God think about that?
He's not too fond of them wanting to make a name for themselves.
That becomes their God. That becomes, they're replacing a name for themselves for Yahweh, the true God.
Yeah.
And in fact, God's going to talk about the name through the rest of the Old Testament. When you read through and you see about the name of God, the name leading them, that's significant because it's not about their name, it's about his name.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're gonna follow right after this the line of Shem. And what does Shem mean?
Shem means name.
Shem means name. But this is God's name.
Yeah.
It's going to be the people that point to God, to Yahweh.
Yeah.
Speaking of Yahweh, let's look at this little verses 5 through 7 here again. And a couple interesting things here. It says Yahweh came down, and that's unusual about God making an appearance on earth. And we've said that the last time we saw this was in the garden.
Yeah.
But this is illustrating a point that we're going to see more and more, or actually a concept or an idea that we're going to see more and more. The times when Yahweh makes appearance as something else, but it's still Yahweh.
Yeah.
For instance, the next story is going to be the story of Abraham. Can you think of times when Yahweh himself appeared to Abraham?
Yeah, the one that comes to my mind quickly is right before Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yep.
It says there's like this figure that comes in, and he didn't even know it was God at first.
Right.
Yeah.
There were 3 of them.
Yeah.
And then it says later on, there's 2 angels, there's 2 messengers that go on to Sodom and Gomorrah to rescue Lot's family. But that Abraham remained there before Yahweh. That one of those 3 people was Yahweh himself.
Yeah.
But Abraham's not the only one. And it happens multiple times in Abraham's life where you have Yahweh appearing to Abraham. But that happens to other people too.
Yeah, like Gideon.
Gideon's a good one. I'll get back to that in a second. One in between that, an important one?
I'm blanking.
10 Commandments.
Moses.
Moses.
Yes.
Moses. It had the times it says. In fact, at the burning bush, it talks about God is appearing. He's appearing before God. But then it calls in an angel. And this is the thing I want us to see. As we go through the Old Testament, as we go through, especially in Genesis, you see this introduction of the angel of Yahweh. But it's also Yahweh. But it's an angel, but then it's not, it's Yahweh.
Yeah, it kind of flips back and forth.
You go through and read the story, and Gideon's probably the best one. And I forget exactly where that is in the book of Judges, but you go there and you read it, and it says an angel appears before Gideon, and then it's Yahweh, and then it's an angel. The angel says, and then God says, and it's flipped. What's the point there? The point there is the angel of Yahweh was Yahweh. It wasn't just some, and it's giving us the thought and the idea that Yahweh, who's the God of all gods, above all things, I am from first to last, could appear and be himself as a personality, a person there
on earth.
in the world.
Yeah.
Now, think about what that's setting God's people up for. The idea of, you can translate God into a representative of God who is God. Just a thought. The angel of the Lord, the angel of Yahweh. And he's also talking, what does he say here? He says, come, let us go down. So he's got an audience he's talking to.
Get the us again.
Where'd that come from? Genesis 1. And whenever you see a phrase, you don't see it, and then you see it again, there's a connection here. And what did the let us do there in Genesis 1?
Yeah. What did it do?
It let us.
Yeah. Oh, let us create.
Let us create. Let us make man. Let us create man and create him in our image. Now, whatever your interpretation of the us is, there's an audience. There's multiple people there. There's multiple things there. I don't know how to say it exactly. And this same us is coming down. And there it is to carry out this separation of people. So, any other thoughts about this story, Jordan? That strike you?
I'm just like, for God to come down, you see him come down to be personal with Adam in the garden. Here it's like, why is God coming down to look at the tower? Like, what is the purpose of him coming down? Is that to see like, hey, what is going on really here? Like, let me witness this firsthand. And so I'm trying to think through like, what is why couldn't God just been up there and just like, let's look at the city and just be like, what are they doing? But instead he's got to actually come down.
And he doesn't have to come down, but he's got to tell his people that he came down.
Yeah.
It's not about God's up there going, I can't see, the clouds are in the way. That's not, of course he knew, but he does something special to communicate to the people that he did something special here. Why? Because this is a special event. This is a special situation. And what comes out of this is very special.
Well, I guess we should point out that this is, in fact, the center of the chiasm.
Yes.
That God came down.
So what would you see the chiasm be?
Well, the chiasm, the bookends are the language. One language, and then they have multiple languages that they're scattered. And you could do a couple more things here, but then you get down to it. The middle is the Lord came down to see the city.
Yep. The Lord came down. And again, it's the idea that you got what people want to do, you got people rebelling, God setting that up and trying to heal that situation. But you got people saying things that are messed up, but in the middle, you got Yahweh, you got God.
Yeah.
And what he does and what he says. It's interesting. Remind me before we're done tonight to talk about the chiasm of Genesis 1 through 11.
All right, we'll do.
I'm asking you to do that.
We'll wrap it up that way. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be a good place to wrap it up. So let's go back then to what is the place of this? Okay, that's an interesting story. It's where we get the different languages. But why is this the story here? Okay, let's go back and let's look at, first of all, the first context is chapter 11 is with chapter 10. Mm-hmm. So chapter 10 is about the nations. But by the way, how many nations are mentioned there?
70 nations.
There's 70 nations. Remember that. That's significant. 70 nations was symbolic of everything, of everyone. Now, if we look in chapter 10, are all the nations of the world that ever existed there? No. I don't see anything but the Chinese or the Koreans or people in the East or the Australians or the Aborigines there in Australia or the native people in America. I don't see all those. But in their world, these were the people, but they were given 70. And I would suggest these aren't all the people that ever lived in ancient Middle East. Yeah. But there's something that's being represented here about this. So this is an action of all these people collectively, and God splits them up. Yeah. Mm-hmm. For a reason, for a purpose. But let's go back and let's remember that this is also in the context of Genesis 1 through 11. And we've talked about the pre-flood and the post-flood. So you've got creation, and then you got rebellion, and then over here you got creation and rebellion. But there's also a story that continues from chapter 1 through chapter 11, and the place that the Tower of Babel, or the Tower of, what does that word mean?
Oh, the Tower of Confusion?
Confusion. That's the right answer there, yeah. That would be translated in other places, Babylon, but Babylon means confusion. Yeah. But you pointed out something about Babylon, name there.
Yeah, for Babel, for the Babylonians, meant like the gate of the gods. So they're building this tower to enter the gate of the gods. In Hebrew, Babel means confusion, like messed up. So they're playing on the words there of like, they thought they were building this awesome gate to God, but in fact they were going to get confused.
It's kind of the only story I ever remember is when like English used English names and it just doesn't translate the same. It's like the Chevrolet Nova from years ago in Spanish means doesn't go.
Oh yeah.
So you've got a Chevrolet Nova that in Spanish doesn't work.
Nova.
So, in this case, you've got the tower, the gateway to the gods.
Yeah.
Nah, it's just confusion. Mm-hmm. But what does this represent? This is we see in Genesis 1 through 11, this is the ultimate of rebellion and the development of rebellion in God's eyes. That's why he had to come down to deal with it.
Yeah.
You began with, in Genesis chapter 1, then Genesis chapter 2, then Genesis chapter 3, you have the rebellion of Adam and Eve. What did they do that was wrong?
They wanted to define good and evil for themselves.
They want to do things on their terms. Then you have rebellion in terms of Cain and Abel, where rebellion now is against in the way that you treat your fellow human being.
Yeah, man against man.
And in this case, God warns Cain. What does Cain want to do? He's going to do things his way. And then he produces a city and a whole lineage of people that are going to glorify themselves in doing things their way. And then you get to before the flood, what?
Just violence.
Violence, evil everywhere. And you don't get the sense that it's organized, but it's just like you can imagine chaos. People everywhere, everything's evil. God brings the flood, recreates the world, starts over again. Individual rebellion, the rebellion of a people. Whose family there?
Yeah. Noah's family?
Noah's family, and which one of his sons?
Oh, Ham.
Ham. You've got a lineage of rebellion now. And then all the bad actors later on in Israel's history comes out of Ham's family.
Yeah.
And what you have here is the rebellion of civilization itself. You have the rebellion, it is organized. And that was we were trying to get a title.
Title there, Organized Rebellion.
This is organized rebellion. This is what civilization does. And that's what we see here. Let's see how, as we said, you've got this downward movement of rebellion from individuals to people to families to civilization. And what I believe Babel represents is all civilizations of all time. All organizing of people that are not organizing for the sake of God.
Yeah.
But for their own what?
For their own glorification of their name.
Exactly. Their own name.
Yeah.
Their own name.
Because unity, it's not bad
to
be unified.
Yeah.
We usually think of unity as a good thing.
Yeah. But now there are nations of God, right?
Yeah. You look at church, the kingdom.
I was talking, first of all...
you're talking about America.
America. We're one nation under God, right? There's good parts about us.
Yeah.
There's good parts about our ideals.
But it's not that God is necessarily for America.
Yeah.
God's on our team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard this said, there is only one nation that's ever by God's purpose, and that's the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
All other nations are Babel. All other nations, all other organizations, all other civilizations, all empires, all powers, all cultures that are organized in such a way for a purpose other than God, other than Yahweh God, they're going to take people away from God's purpose. They're going to go east.
Yeah.
Now, what God says, I don't want you to go east.
Yeah. I
want you to go west. So this would be the logical conclusion of chapters 1 through 11, and that this is the foundation of the rest of Genesis. It's the foundation of the Genesis story.
Yeah.
It's the foundation of not only just Genesis of chapters 1 through 11, and it ends with here is the separation and rebellion of all civilizations, but it's the foundation of all of Israel's history through the rest of the Old Testament. In fact, this chapters 1 through 11 is the foundation of God's redemption story.
Yeah.
And that's what we got to see. It doesn't finish with the physical nation of Israel, but it's the background and foundation to the New Testament.
The stage has been set.
Yep, the stage is set. Now, I want to say one more thing, and that is this, that we got to remember, this is the plight and journey of mankind. But behind all of this, there's a spiritual battle going on. We've already talked about that. You got creation, you got Adam and Eve, you got the garden, and then you got the introduction of there's other spiritual beings out there trying to rebel against God. You get to Genesis chapter 6, and you have the sons of God and taking the daughters of men, and what comes out of that. And you realize there are spiritual beings that are rebelling against God.
Yeah.
And you have an interesting story here in Genesis chapter 11 that the Hebrews see and understand to be the point where God says, I'm done working through the nations. I'm going to grab a nation. Matter of fact, I'm going to turn the nations over to the other gods. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 7 through 12. You look that up and you read that. That says that God divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God. Now, there's also a translation there, according to the sons of Israel, but if you read it, it doesn't make sense. Whereas the earlier texts in the Hebrew say he divided up according to the sons of God.
Interesting. Yeah.
And you get this picture of God saying, you want to go your own way?
Just give them over.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Follow your own gods.
Yeah.
Now, what are those sons of God going to do? They're going to rebel. They're going to take their nations in the wrong way. God say, I'm going to build my own nation. In fact, if you look at Deuteronomy 32, it talks about that God's inheritance, God's possession is Israel. God creates his own people to be his. In other words, all the nations belong to the gods out there. This one's mine.
It makes sense even with how you read the Bible, and God usually chooses the youngest son or the weakest person to work through, and then Israel's looking around at Babylon and Persia and Egypt, and like he's given them over to the other gods, but this one is mine, this smaller nation of weaker people.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Excellent. This insignificant that archaeological history can't even tell where it came from. And yet we look at the Bible and we see where the history came from, where it is. And this is a civilization that has changed mankind. It's changed the world because this is where God is working.
Yeah.
And God is bringing out his plan in these people. And what happens to those other nations out there? They go to the other gods. Yeah. Remember the ones we said, the other spiritual beings. There's things going on out there. And the number, how many nations were there here?
70.
70. Is that literally the number of nations? No, we know there are more than that, but there is the number of 70. You know, when you read Hebrew literature, you know how many they numbered the heavenly council to be?
My guess is probably 70.
70.
Yeah.
Yep. They called 70. Now, I don't know that we read that in the Old Testament exactly, but when we talk about the host of hosts and the special council there with God being 70, you know how many were in the Sanhedrin?
70.
Who's the Sanhedrin?
The Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council.
The Jewish ruling council. They picked 70 to be their people. Do you remember how many people Jesus chose to send out?
70 disciples.
He sent out the 70. And what did those disciples come back and say?
They saw Satan fall like lightning.
We saw Satan fall. What is this the beginning of? God's getting the nations back.
Bringing the nations back.
What's the story of the New Testament? He's got his people, and God's bringing the nations back.
Yeah.
And when did that start? It separated here with confusion. When does it all start coming back together?
Pentecost.
What happened at Pentecost?
The disciples speak in different tongues to the nations.
It's the very opposite.
Yeah.
They all speak the same language, then they can't understand each other. Now they all speak different languages, and now the apostles are preaching.
Yeah.
We all hear them.
It's reverse Babylon.
It's reverse Babylon. Yeah. And that's why Paul goes on to say now, when he's talking in Ephesians, when he's talking about the battle of the Jews and the Gentiles coming together, what does he say? Our battle is what?
Not against flesh and blood.
What is it against?
The spiritual world, the principalities, the powers that we don't see. Yeah, the authorities.
Yeah. The ones that God turned the nations over to, he's taking them back. And there's a struggle.
Yeah.
There's a spiritual struggle. So this is part of that line of struggle we have. So think about that. When you see that, you see this is why the Tower of Babel is the last story here of chapter 11. Now it goes on to give us the account or the family of Shem. Why Shem?
Why Shem? Because he was the one that he acted righteously.
He was the hero in the story there.
His name means name.
Okay, and in verse 26, where does it end? The family of Shem ends with
Abram.
Abram. It's Terah is his father, and then Abram, who becomes Abraham, is one of his sons. Also of significance, these guys are all significant, I'm sure, but is Eber in verse 17. That's the name. That's
Hebrew.
That's where we get Hebrew from, is the name of Eber. Now, this leads us to Abraham. This leads us to Abraham. This is all a foundation to lead us to Abraham. What's so special about Abraham? Men have gone east. Now what's he going to do?
He goes west.
He's going to say, I want you to go west. And Abraham's going to say, all right, I'm with you. And he becomes a friend of God.
Yep.
Not an enemy of God, but he becomes a friend of God. Last thought I want us to leave us with is the center of Genesis 1 through 11.
Yep, you remembered.
I did.
Yes, you
I
did.
remembered it. Now, it's not as obvious when you see the book. You can't see the bookends of actually rather than you have doom, 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 A, B, C, D, and then you have A, B, C, D. That's kind of like with the flood in the middle. What is the center part? What would be the center verse, the center idea? It's in Genesis chapter 8. No, I don't mean 8. I mean 5. Genesis chapter 5 and verse 29. This is the center of the chiasm of Genesis 1 through 11. Read that for us, Jordan.
He named him Noah and said, he will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed.
Okay. Interesting center. But remember the center of the chiasm. What's the importance of the center?
It's really what what it's pointing to.
What's
What we're
the
trying to
main
get.
point?
The
What
main
is-
point here.
What is
Yeah.
existence all about?
It's about being one with God, walking with God. Yeah.
Life is hard, but there is comfort because it comes from Yahweh.
And Noah means comfort.
And Noah means comfort. Noah means rest. What was God's intention? Genesis chapter 1?
You had to give rest.
Rest. That's his purpose. That's what he wants to bring us to. This is the foundation of the story. That's going to lead us to the one who says, if you got labor, if you got trials, come to me. I'll give you rest.
So this concludes our final episode of our series of Pillars of Creation. We want to thank you guys for tuning in, and we're going to have our last series of questions and answers right after this.